Hello everyone, welcome once again to my educational channel called Learning Biology with Janet, where I will be teaching you Form 4 and Form 5 biology with clarity and enthusiasm. Our topic today involves Form 4 biology, Chapter 4, Subtopic 4.2 on chemical composition in a cell, and we are going to study the last section on carbohydrates. So it's called Carbohydrates 3, where we'll be studying the polysaccharides. So today we have another interesting biology lesson, and the unique feature of these lessons are that we have memory tips at the end of the video. So look out for these memory tips that will surely help you to remember some of the things that you have learned here more easily. So let's get started. Let's look at our schematic diagram on carbohydrates again. Carbohydrates are divided into the three types: monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. We have already studied the monosaccharides and the disaccharides. So in this final video, we will study the polysaccharides. Polysaccharides are complex carbohydrates with the formula C6H10O5 and bracket N, where N is a large number like 100 or more. There are three examples of polysaccharides, namely glycogen, starch, and cellulose. Our learning outcomes for this lesson are as follows. After the lesson, we should be able to state the examples of polysaccharides, their chemical formula, physical properties, structures, and their sources. Secondly, we should be able to explain the formation and breakdown of polysaccharides. And thirdly, we must be able to state the functions of carbohydrates. Polysaccharides. What are they? From the name polysaccharides, we know that polysaccharides are made up of many units of simple sugar molecules. The word poly means many, and saccharides means the sugar molecule, especially the simple sugar. Okay, so many sugar units. So polysaccharides are called complex carbohydrates because they are more complex and bigger and larger in the molecular size than the simple sugars or the complex sugars. Okay, simple sugars are the monosaccharides, complex sugars are the disaccharides. Okay, and then complex carbohydrates refer to the polysaccharides. So polysaccharides are polymers of simple sugars or polymers of monosaccharides, such as glucose, meaning that they consist of many monomer units. Same monomer, the same monomer is joined together to form a long chain, okay, of the polymer. For example, starch, cellulose, and glycogen are all polymers of glucose. They're all made up of this basic unit called glucose. So what is the difference between starch, cellulose, and glycogen? They're all made up of glucose. Well, the difference is in their structure, the structure of the molecules, which we will discuss later. Now let's go on to number 4. The chemical formula for all polysaccharides is C6H10O5 bracket N. Okay, this is the number of the repeating units, where N is more than 100. N can be 200, 300, 500 or so, and depends on the polysaccharide. But notice the basic formula is C6H10O5, not C6H12O6. Take note, okay? H10O5, not the other one, H12O6. Why is that so? You see, when at least two molecules, when two molecules of glucose or a monosaccharide were to combine together in the process of condensation, one molecule of water is removed. Okay, so if one water molecule is removed from the two molecules that join, that means you have the minus H2O, and that's how you land up with C6H10 only O5 instead of H12O6. Okay, so please go and memorize the formula for polysaccharides. Now, physical properties of polysaccharides. They are not soluble in water because they have a large molecular size, and they do not taste sweet, they do not crystallize. So this is how it's different from the disaccharides and monosaccharides. The physical properties of polysaccharides are different from monosaccharides and disaccharides. Now, examples of polysaccharides are starch, glycogen, and cellulose. Let us discuss the formation and breakdown of polysaccharides, which is an important learning outcome for this subtopic. So number 3, formation. Polysaccharides are formed through condensation of hundreds of monosaccharide molecules, such as glucose, that are joined together to form long chains. What is the definition for condensation? Let's try to recall it. Condensation is a chemical process in which smaller molecules combine together to form larger, more complex molecules with the removal of molecules of water. Okay, so here, let's look at this diagram here. The smaller molecules are the units, many units of monosaccharides, such as glucose. They combine together to form the larger and more complex molecule, which is the polysaccharide, with the removal of molecules of water. That means water is formed as a product. Okay, so an example is that of starch. Glucose molecules join together to form long chains and produce the starch molecule, which is a polymer of glucose, a long chain of glucose molecules. Right, how are polysaccharides broken down? So this is the opposite reaction from condensation. Okay, so number 4, breakdown of polysaccharides. Polysaccharides can be broken down through hydrolysis into many small molecules of monosaccharides. Again, we have to be able to define hydrolysis in case we are asked the question in the exam. We have to remember the definition well. Hydrolysis is a chemical process or reaction in which larger, more complex molecules are broken down. Okay, the word lysis means broken down into smaller molecules with the addition or removal of water. Yes, with the addition of water. Okay, so we have to add water to the substrate, like the complex molecule like polysaccharides, and through the chemical reaction we produce monosaccharides. Okay, so let's fill up the blanks here on top of the arrows. Now, many units of monosaccharides become a polysaccharide plus water. What is the name for this reaction? So from smaller molecules to bigger molecules to more complex molecules, the process is condensation. And the reverse process below here is hydrolysis. Okay, and then we look at this equation. Polysaccharide plus water gives you monosaccharides. Now this equation is the same as the backward reaction here. Alright, polysaccharide plus water through hydrolysis gives you many units of monosaccharides. Okay, so it's hydrolysis. So how do you know when a reaction is hydrolysis or condensation? Okay, let's look at some pointers. For condensation, from a simpler unit, as it joins to another simple unit, small unit, two small units joined together, you get a more complex one. Okay, so this definition for condensation actually has the memory aid in itself. Condensation is the chemical reaction in which smaller molecules combine, CO, they have this word CO, combine to form larger and more complex, CO, complex, starts with the word CO, complex molecules, okay, such as the polysaccharide, with the removal of molecules of water. So the water must be on the right hand side, okay, for condensation. And you must have small units of a substance here, smaller units, and when they combine, they form the more complex molecule. That's condensation. Hydrolysis is just the opposite. The water is on the left hand side. It is the reactant. As you see from this word, hydrolysis. Okay, let it remind you. Hydrolysis. Think of that. Hydro becomes lysis. So hydro is water. It is on the right hand side of the equation. And then arrow to lysis. That means the left hand side of the equation should show the products of lysis, which are the smaller molecules, okay, compared to the bigger molecules on the left hand side. Smaller molecules will be produced on the right hand side. Okay, that's all for this part. So I've explained in length because these questions tend to come out about condensation and hydrolysis, where you have to identify whether it's condensation or hydrolysis. Here are two examples of what we have discussed earlier. Many glucose molecules, as shown here, join together to form starch during the process of condensation, and water is removed in the process. Of course, the starch molecule is longer than this, alright? It can be more than 100 glucose molecules, consists of that, and beyond. Many glucose molecules combine to form the cellulose, and water is removed in the process. And this process is called condensation, whereas the opposite process is hydrolysis. Let us look at the structure of the polysaccharides to see the differences between starch, glycogen, and cellulose. So all these three polysaccharides are made up of glucose monomers, but their structures are all different. For starch, there are actually two forms of starch, and we're going to look at the one that has the coiled or spiral structure. Okay, so one type of the starch molecule has this coiled shape like a spring or a spiral structure, and so it can be tightly coiled up in the cell, okay, as a storage compound. So as a food reserve or carbohydrate reserve, it is easily coiled up in the cell and it doesn't take up much space. So it's suitable as a storage compound. The other type that is branched looks something like a glycogen molecule. Okay, so we're coming to glycogen now. Glycogen molecule is highly branched, meaning to say that it can form branches away out of from the main structure, from the main glycogen molecule. Okay, so there are many branches sticking out all over the molecule, right? So this is the structure of the glycogen molecule. And then we come to cellulose. Cellulose is very different because it consists of straight parallel chains of glucose that are bound together by the hydrogen bonds here. Okay, so there are other parallel chains of glucose and they're also bound to each other by hydrogen bonds. And this is what makes the glucose very strong and tough and rigid. So it's used to build the cell walls of plants, and it makes the cell walls very rigid and tough so that they can give support to the cell and maintain the shape of the cell. Okay, let's discuss the location and structure of the cellulose in more detail, as this was done in the textbook. Here's a leaf, and in the leaf there are many cells. So all these cells have the cell walls. So let's enlarge one cell wall. we will see that it is made up of cellulose microfibrils, which are just tiny cellulose fibers. If we were to enlarge one cellulose microfibril, we will see that it consists of bundles of cellulose molecules. Okay, so let's enlarge these cellulose structures here. You'll find that there are many cellulose molecules that are arranged in a parallel manner close to each other, and they have these hydrogen bonds that hold them together. And so this type of structure is very strong because of the hydrogen bonds. This makes the cellulose a tough and strong type of polysaccharide that is used to build the plant cell walls. So this gives the plant cell walls the tough and rigid characteristic that's important to give support, to help the cell wall give support to the plant cells and to maintain the shape of the plant cells. Let's discuss the location and the sources of polysaccharides. Glycogen, where is it found? So it's found in animal cells and also human cells, but it's not found in plant cells because plants do not synthesize glycogen. So glycogen is stored in the liver and muscle cells of animals. And when it is needed, when glucose is needed, glycogen can be converted into glucose for the cell's needs. Starch is synthesized by plants only. So it's found in the chloroplasts of plant cells, especially the plant cells that are photosynthesizing. Alright, they have these chloroplasts where glucose is being synthesized. So if the glucose is in excess, it will be stored as starch grains inside the organelle called the chloroplast. Okay, so chloroplasts contain starch. And for food sources of starch, grains like rice, wheat, and corn all contain starch. Okay. Also, starch is found in potatoes and legumes. Legumes are the plants from the bean family and the pea family. For example, long beans, soya beans, and so forth. All these do contain some starch. Lastly, cellulose. Where is it found? So cellulose again is found only in plant cells and plants, not in animals. And it is found in the cell walls of plants, where it is used to build up the cell walls that are rigid and strong, okay, to give support to the cell and to help it maintain the shape of the cell. Do you know that cellulose is the most abundant organic compound in the whole earth? Because it's found in plants, and plants grow everywhere. What are the general functions of the polysaccharides in organisms? There are two groups of polysaccharides actually when you talk about their functions. The first group, like starch and glycogen, serve as storage polysaccharides that store the carbohydrates in the cells. And the second group is the cellulose and also chitin, which are structural polysaccharides that provide structural support to the organism. Let's look at the first one. Starch and glycogen are known as storage polysaccharides because they store carbohydrates in the cells. For example, glycogen consists of glucose molecules that are joined together, right, in a long chain. So when the body needs to use glucose and there is a lack of glucose in the blood, the glucose will be obtained from the glycogen molecules. Glycogen is converted into glucose so that the glucose level in the blood will rise, and glucose can be used in cellular respiration to produce energy for the cells. So in that way, glycogen stores the glucose. Okay, and this is for animals. Glycogen is only found in animal cells. For plants, starch is the storage compound that stores the carbohydrates. Okay, so these two, starch and glycogen, are called the carbohydrate stores or carbohydrate reserves in the cells. The advantage of these two compounds or polysaccharides in being the carbohydrate reserve or store is that they are insoluble, so they will not raise the osmotic pressure or the water potential in the cell when they are being produced, because they do not dissolve in water and they do not increase the concentration of the solutes in the cell. Okay, so they do not affect the water potential or water concentration in the cell. They are also compact and take up less space in the cell as a storage compound. Now, the second group of polysaccharides are the cellulose, and chitin compound. Both are structural polysaccharides that provide structural support to the cells and to the organism. For example, cellulose is a tough polysaccharide, tough and hard polysaccharide that's used to build the cell walls of plant cells, and they provide support to the plant cells and help maintain the shape of the plant cells. For chitin is mentioned in the textbook, so we have to know something about chitin. Chitin is actually a tough, hard polysaccharide, okay, found in the shells of crabs, prawns, insects, all those organisms that have the segmented body parts, which are called arthropods. Okay, so you just remember chitin is found in the shells of certain animals like crabs and insects. And it gives support to these organisms because the shell gives support to the organisms, and also it protects the crabs and insects from injury. So it is a structural polysaccharide because it gives support to the organisms. A common question in the SPM and other exams is to ask the student to explain the functions of the various organic compounds or inorganic compounds in the cells, one of which is carbohydrate. So let's say you're asked to explain the functions of carbohydrate in cells, whether plant or animal cells. So first we mentioned that all the compounds that we are going to state below, they are all carbohydrates. Glucose, starch, glycogen, cellulose, and chitin are all carbohydrates. Next, state the function of all these different compounds. Glucose, for example, is an immediate source of energy for cellular activities. 1 mark. Now, if you have to further elaborate, then you can mention that the glucose will react with oxygen, so it's oxidized in cellular respiration in the cells in order to produce the energy for the cells to carry out its activities. Okay. Now, starch acts as a food reserve, or as we said earlier, a carbohydrate storage compound for carbohydrates in plant cells. It's only synthesized in the plant cells. Glycogen functions as a food reserve, okay, or a storage compound for carbohydrates in animal cells only. And fourthly, cellulose. Cellulose is used to build the plant cell walls, and it functions as a support structure. For example, it can help prevent the bursting of turgid cells because the cell wall is made strong and tough by the cellulose. Lastly, this is an extra point not found in the books. Chitin, which is a polysaccharide too, forms the exoskeleton or cuticle of insects, and that hence it protects the inner tissues from injury. It's the outer skeleton of the insects. Let's study the use of chitin. Since it is mentioned in the textbook, so it may be asked in the HOTS questions also. Now, the use of polysaccharides in medicine. Chitin is a polysaccharide found in the insects' shells and the outer shell of the crab and prawns and of other arthropods. Arthropods are organisms with segmented bodies like the insects and the prawns and crabs. So they all have this polysaccharide called chitin to build up their shells, and it is a strong polysaccharide and also biodegradable, meaning that it can be broken down naturally in the environment or broken down quickly and naturally. It is used to make strong and flexible surgical threads to sew up the wounds of a patient, especially after surgery, for example. So nowadays, the threads used to sew up the wounds are able to decompose on their own because they are made from chitin. So the advantage is that the chitin stitches will decompose by themselves after the wound heals, and the patient does not need to go back to see the doctor to remove the threads, which may be painful to the patient. Okay, so it's more advantageous to use the chitin threads. Lastly, here's a memory tip for polysaccharides. Gaily start the cell phone. Gaily means happily, happily start the cell phone, because there are lots of things to see on the cell phone, to view on the cell phone. So gaily, we have the GLY to help the person memorize or remember, jot the memory. Okay, so stands for glycogen. Start, STAR, stands for starch. The sound is also like starch. Cell phone, cell is of course for cellulose. So gaily start the cell phone. All right. Now, do you remember your acronyms for monosaccharides and disaccharides? Okay, for monosaccharides is glum, fruit, gal, glucose, fructose, and galactose. And for disaccharides is llamas, lactose, maltose, and sucrose. So I've made a sentence here that involves all the three acronyms or mnemonics. Okay, so glum, fruit, gal loves llamas and gaily starts the cell phone. I repeat, glum, fruit, gal, the monosaccharides, love llamas. These are the disaccharides. And gaily start the cell phone. Those are the polysaccharides. So I think if you keep memorizing this, you will remember it very well. Okay, unless you don't have a problem remembering all the examples of monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Okay, so write down the acronyms on a piece of paper or sticky note and put it somewhere. All right, and keep reviewing it. When you keep reviewing it from day to day or from week to week and testing yourself, you must test yourself, and then you will find that when you test yourself, you get better and better, and the brain will pick up the terms and the acronyms. Okay, so all the best to you all. Stay calm and keep studying, because we have many more weeks of home revision, right? So I will see you all in the next time we will meet again, and keep safe. Bye.